guys really seem to enjoy the last one, so let's try to keep this going. I don't think I could have gotten a car any further from the car we used last week for the second episode of Modified Mondays, so we'll see what you guys think about this. So last week, obviously, we had that, 800 plus horsepower supercharged Mustang. And this week, we've gone supercharged to turbo. So this is a 2015 Fiat 500 Abarth. Now, obviously, I'm going to rile some commenters up, and I'm sure some people are going to be, don't like the Fiat 500 and come in with their own preconceived biases. However, I will guarantee you, if you drive one of these, that will change your mind. It's just such a fun package. It's, it's small. It's great in the city because you can dart through all these little openings that you wouldn't be able to get through otherwise. But yes, we are reviewing a Fiat 500. So now that everyone who hates on this car has left or is in my comment section talking shit, we'll get into the details of it. And if you read the title, yes, this is big turboed. This is probably the most ridiculous car I've ever had the pleasure of participating in. It is just absolutely hilarious. As you can hear by, hopefully, the burbles and backfires, yes, this is on a burble tune. So this is Eurocompulsion Phase 2 Big Turbo. What can I say about this? This is probably the most fun car I've ever driven. It's just, in comparison to that Mustang, where really you need to be on a closed highway to have any chance of being able to use that car, this you can use anywhere. So obviously big turbo, so these from the factory make about 130 wheel and I believe about 150 foot-pounds of torque at the wheel, or 157 crank and 184 crank. This car has two settings. The first one is the base mapping for it. On that, it makes 170 wheel horsepower and 200 foot-pounds of torque, and that's the Eurocompulsion Phase 0 tune. This also has the Phase 2 Plus Big Turbo tune at the press of my finger when I push the Sport button. And on that setup, this has 220 wheel horsepower and 250 foot-pounds of torque, or roughly 250 crank, 280 crank. In a car, now again, is that a lot? No, it's not. However, in a car that weighs 2,500 pounds, that's something to scoff at. It's a ton of fun. Obviously, like I said, you can use this anywhere. This car is relatively lightly modified. It does have the big turbo upgrade. It does have an intake. It also originally came on 17-inch wheels. This one is on 16s. Like I mentioned previously, we're in the great state of Massachusetts yet again. Some of you may notice who were here last week. This is the same road. Again, I have a little bit of favoritism with this road, but this will not be the only road we'll be using. So next week's going to be a little bit different. It'll be a car, it'll be a slightly different POV. We're going to have one other person in the car, and that'll be the owner of the vehicle. So stay tuned for that, and we'll have a couple other fast things on here, but I just figured, hey, let's go from supercharged 8 to turbocharged inline 4. So obviously it's a hot version of an economy car. Now the motor in this is a 1.4 liter 4-cylinder. It is actually the same turbo motor you can get in the older Jeep Renegades. Cool thing with this and the exhaust, this is actually straight piped from the factory, so there's no resonator, no muffler. I believe it was the only car in the US ever sold like that, so it sounds fantastic. This car just has a ton of personality. Like I said, you can use the entire thing. It's great in the corners, so it'll really hold on. You can throw it pretty hard at a corner. And like I said, because the power is so manageable and kind of normal power levels, you can really just full send this thing everywhere. So this is daily driven. Unbiasedly, I will tell you this is probably the perfect daily driver. This will get 40 miles to the gallon on the highway. It has a 10-gallon tank, so even with the 93 tune it's on, and 93 being 4.40 a gallon out here in Massachusetts, still, it usually doesn't cost me more than 35 bucks to fill a tank. It's super easy to find parking with it, obviously, because it's so small. And as you can see from the traffic in front of me, and like I mentioned, you can really use it all the time. I mean, there's traffic in front of us, and I can still play with the car just in this little space. Is it fast? Like I said, no. 0 to 60 on these, I believe it's like 6.9 seconds. Even with the big turbo on it, if this goes 0 to 60 in less than 6 seconds, I would be shocked. The nice thing with this, though, is you have all that low-end torque. So for any of like the city driving, it does have enough punch where it can get out of its own way, which really for me is like the most important thing with, you know, any car. Of the highway merge is obviously always really important. What I always tell people is the Fiat Abarth is really good at two things: sounding amazing and cornering. One of my other favorite kind of weird quirks with the Abarth is the easiest way to make the exhaust louder, because there's no resonator or muffler, is just to put your back seats down. And for whatever reason, the in-cabin exhaust noise at that point just becomes louder with the car. Big reason I got this too was my fiance has a normal Fiat 500, so NA. I'd always told her with like 50 more horsepower, this would be one of the most fun cars I'd ever driven. So we always kind of were faced with this prisoner's dilemma when we wanted to go to New York to go see my family because they live in New York City. Either we take my Mustang, which on the highway is an absolute monster. However, once we get to the city, it was always the biggest pain in the ass ever to try to find parking for it. Or we take the Fiat, which is terrifying on the highway because it only has 100 horsepower. But when we get to New York, the parking situation is super easy to deal with. So this is sort of the best of both worlds, where when I was looking at this originally, it had 50 more horsepower than the stock Fiat 557 and 84 more foot-pounds of torque. Now, obviously, it's got 180 more torque and 150 more horsepower. Overall, my conclusions: just a really, really fun car. You have decent amount of firepower in such a small package, you know, where, like I said, the power numbers really aren't that crazy, but it's just in something this small that'll corner this well, that'll really hold on. Like, you know, we had this thing at triple digits on Kangamangas. But yeah, for me, this is one of my favorite cars. And yes, this one is mine. And I'll say this, I've said this to people who know me, and I'll say this to the internet: of all the cars I've ever owned, this is the only one I would buy a second time. Like, I love my Mustang, and I don't ever plan to get rid of it, but I wouldn't buy it a second time. This I'd buy again. But hey, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for tuning into the second episode. We're going to change it up a little bit with the format next week. I don't want to give too much away, but I am very excited to show you what we have for next week. Thank you guys. Drive safe.